Wonderful. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. So I extend a warm welcome to all of you. My name is Michelle, and I'm NUMU's Education Programs Manager. And today we're so delighted to have the chance to hear from artist Jane Olin, our photographer for our current exhibition, and the Company of Trees, which opened on January 14th of this year and runs until June 5th. In this program, guest curator Helaine Glick will be interviewing Jane about her artistic process. We will have time for audience questions at the end of the program, so please do type your questions in the chat so that we can ask them at the end. If you need anything at all during the program, you can send me a message directly in the Zoom chat. And if you need closed captions for this program, you should be able to enable them by clicking the live transcript bottom on your Zoom screen, right at the bottom to the right. Please stay tuned at the end for some details on our next upcoming program for Jane Olin's exhibition with poet Patrice Vecchioni, and I will drop that link in the chat. And without further ado, I'd like to just briefly introduce Helaine, our guest curator, and then I'll pass it off to Jane and Helaine. So our guest curator, Helaine Glick, first worked with Jane Olin in 2016, curating a two-person exhibition for her at the Center for Photographic Art in Carmel, California. She was formerly an assistant curator at the Monterey Museum of Art in Monterey. There, she curated numerous exhibitions, many focusing on photography. She has also curated at the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art in Sonoma, California. And at NUMU, she was actually a guest curator in 2019 for our exhibition with Warren Chang, Voice of the Fields. So thank you both, Jane and Helaine, for being with us today. I can't wait to hear about Jane's process.
Right, thank you very much. Hi, Jane.
Thank you, Michelle, very much. I'm just going to put a little plug in for my brochure that's available, complimentary, available at NUMU. So pick one up when you go into the exhibition. It's a threefold brochure. And if you know of anybody that would be interested in learning about trees and seeing the exhibition, pick up more than one. There's plenty.
All right.
All right, Helaine.
All right. So you made a transition in midlife that led you to become a full-time photographer. Can you talk about what motivated you to take this step? And also, what led you to choose photography as your medium specifically?
Thank you, Helaine. Everything in my outward life was going very well. Busy and sometimes very hectic. But in the 20 years of raising children, running a home, and working for our family-owned business, I lost myself. Perhaps some of you can relate to that. I knew something was not quite right because in quiet moments and night dreams, a very subtle yearning surfaced. A yearning that told me that I needed to do something beyond my present life. I wanted to discover what that was. My children entered college. I retired from our family-owned business, and I set out to discover my passion with a willingness to go anywhere it led me. I absolutely love the way Terry Tempest Williams describes passion. Allow me to read it to you. What I fear and desire most in this world is passion. I fear it because it promises to be spontaneous, out of my control, unnamed, beyond my reasonable self. I desire it because passion has color. It is not pale. It is not neutral. It reveals the backside of the heart.
Wow, that's nice.
To discover my passion, I dove into several years of soul searching, writing in my journal every day, very long walks in the forest, even several years of therapy. Photography often bubbled to the surface more than once. I finally decided to act on it. I must start somewhere. I enrolled in a black and white photography course at Monterey Peninsula College. I fell in love with darkroom work. With that, my journey began. A little creation story. One morning, I sat with my college-age son, Matthew, spreading all his wonderful artwork on the kitchen table while telling him that he could be a successful artist if he stayed focused and worked hard. We sat in silence for a long moment, and I had enough sense not to say anything. Finally, he said, "Mom, I have other plans for my life." I always get emotional here, so forgive me. At that moment, a wave of energy went through my body. I sat for a moment quivering with emotion, realizing that it was I who wanted to be the artist. It always happens.
Oh,
That moment, that singular moment, changed the direction of my life. I began taking myself seriously as an artist, staying focused and working hard, heeding the advice I had given to my son. Now, the 21st century, I'm really an outlier. My creative work happens in the dark room with film. When my colleagues migrated into digital work, I said, that's not for me. I'll never use digital. My creative mecca is the dark room. But surprises happen. I've learned to never say never. My darkroom process prints are small, and they really wanted to be big. So I relented. Now my pigment prints are made from each of my unique process prints. When you visit a NUMU gallery, you'll see the large pigment prints, but just remember, there's no Photoshop. All the creative work is accomplished in the dark room.
I love that quote from Terry Tempest Williams. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I love it too.
So let's talk about how you first went about learning photography. As a Monterey County resident, you got to study with some of the colleagues and the assistants of Ansel Adams and Edward Weston. And you learned Adams's zone system, and you learned many of the tenets of straight photography. Yet, it didn't take you long to go in a different direction. So why did you decide you didn't want to make F64 style photographs? And what was some of your early work, and what were the motivations for making that work?
Well, since many of you are not darkroom practitioners, I'll give you a short description of F64 straight photography. This will give you a little grounding as I talk about experimentation in the dark room. The perfect straight print must adhere to to Ansel Adams' zone system. The print must have a zone 3, a shadow area with just a little detail, and a zone 7, a highlight with just a little detail. And the print must be printed on glossy paper and, if possible, selenium toned. My artistic evolution began in earnest 30 years ago when I built my first darkroom in our oversized furnace room, could you believe? Having my own darkroom opened a door of creativity for me. Well, what made me decide to push against the strict rules of F64 and street photography? Honestly, I really didn't decide. It was more of a feeling that I followed. I wanted to create what I wanted to create. And from the very beginning, I wanted to somehow imbue two-dimensional surface with an essence, with the mystery, with the spirit or soul of my subject. So yes, little by little, I pushed against straight photography, the rules of which I could not follow anymore. Oh, there we go. There it is, Calla. My first series, Calla, I just took little steps pushing against what I had learned at Monterey Peninsula College. For this series, instead of having a zone 3, which is a deep shadow, I didn't do that. And I also wanted, I always felt from the very beginning that glossy paper didn't allow the viewer to come into the photograph. So I threw away that. And I also decided that sepia toning was the toning that I liked. It's a little bit softer. It's as you can see, it has a little brown tone to it. And I continued with that. And I decided that was the direction I wanted to go in for this body of work. This body of work, I stayed with for almost 4 years. And as I said before, I wanted to get something about the essence, something about the soul of what I was photographing into this image. And I worked very slowly. Here's what I learned that first series. I listened to myself. I trusted myself. I started writing about my work in process. I began with this series and I've continued. All of my work is in series. And I really, really understood that editing was very important. Editing my work was extremely important because if my goal was to get this elusive energy onto the surface of a two-dimensional piece of paper, I needed to be really careful with that. Actually, only prints that met the criteria of imbuing the image with its essence, or if you will, spirit, made the cut. I made a lot of beautiful calla lilies, but they just were not going to end up in my portfolio. And so editing became crucial for me. With subsequent series, I gave myself permission to do whatever it took to create the image I wanted. So yes, I began breaking most of the straight photography rules, and finally, letting them go entirely when I began process printing. My next body of work was Greta. And as you can see, it's nothing like a straight photograph. It's accomplished by pinhole photography. And then a fortuitous accident happened, and I love those. And I was working a night very late, and I forgot, I put another negative into my enlarger and didn't focus it. So I made the image and I really liked it. It was out of focus, and you can see at the bottom where the kind of the light is coming up through the legs. I love that idea. So I decided then and there that that was what I was going to do with that body of work. Pinhole plus make it a little more out of focus in the enlarger. And these were brown toned. I pushed aside sepia toning, and I decided I really wanted to have them brown toned. And of course, the pinhole allows you to move while you're making the exposure because it's a very long exposure. My next series was 13 Crows. And with this series, I was very challenged because I had gotten inspiration. Oh, I needed to make photographs of crows. I started really watching them in my garden, and I became very fascinated by crows. And I got the inspiration, oh, I have to photograph crows. There's something there for me. But my first try at photographing crows was really a disaster. And I thought, oh no, they're too elusive for me. I'm not going to do that. So I tried to let go of this idea of doing this body of work. And I started just doing other things. And then I was at Nepenthe down on the Big Sur coast, having a little cup of tea, writing in my journal, and plop, right on my journal page. And I looked up, and there sat a crow. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And I started to look around, and I saw that the crows were eating the leftover lunch at the restaurant Kiva. And so I thought, just in that instant, I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I got the message. Here's the place. I can do it. So I had the difficult job of going to Kiva quite often, and just sitting there and watching the crows and photographing and experimenting, really. I put my lens out of focus. I panned with the crows. I just tried everything that came into my head, and having a lot of fun with it. It was more like play. And I got back to my darkroom and started working on them. And this is another body of work with a limited amount of pieces in the portfolio, 13. And I worked 3 or 4, maybe 5 years on it. But when I get into working on something, I just have to love it because I'm in the darkroom a lot. And I love these crows. So as far as experimentation is concerned, this crow, which is one of my favorites, the background was way too dark. And I tried all the darkroom techniques. I tried dodging, burning, and dodging, and no good outcome, believe me. And so one day I said, maybe I'll use a photographic solution, farmer's reducer, to on a Q-tip, trying to lighten the background. And so I did that. And you can see that on this image, you can see where the Q-tip was going back and forth. And I love that kind of wave. It reflects what the crow is doing. And I lightened the background to my satisfaction. And here it is. More experimentation, just doing what comes to mind.
All right. So now we know what a great experimenter.
Well, I haven't, yes.
You are in the darkroom. Are you still wanting to talk some more about this?
No, I think my guests have gotten the idea of how I experiment.
Yes.
Jane,
really...
I just wanted to say that, you know, I wonder what Henry Gilpin would have said looking at your crows.
Oh, I loved Henry
Your
Gilpin.
teacher.
I just cherished him.
Yeah.
He taught me straight photography, and he was a gifted photographer. And he worked with Ansel Adams, and he was the nicest man.
Yeah.
And he really encouraged me. He gave me, he kind of set me aside and encouraged me. And I so appreciated that. And I thanked him every time I saw him. He's now gone. But Henry Gilpin would have said, oh, well, that's interesting. He wouldn't say anything negative, I'm sure.
So continuing down your experimental path, the process that you used in Intimate Conversation, this series that is on display at NUMU, that process came about through another fortuitous accident. So can you tell us about this accident, and how did it happen, and why and when and how did you decide you wanted to explore it further?
Well, we do love those fortuitous accidents, don't we? And I think you're kind of getting an idea of how I work now. I work with intuition, impulse. And I was in Cuba in 2011. While photographing, I noticed a wall of dead plants laying against it. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But the light was not good, so I walked past it. Suddenly, I received an intuitive impulse that made me stop in my tracks. And I turned around and I headed back, thinking, well, maybe there's something there for me. As I began photographing, I was captured by that simple scene. And instead of making one image, I made at least 24 images. Both back in my studio, after looking at the contact sheets, I determined I didn't really see anything that intrigued me. So I put the negatives aside. A year later, I went to my studio with no agenda and asked myself, well, what should I work on today? Those Cuban negatives came to mind. And I thought, why not? I had such a strong intuitive impulse to photograph them. I can at least give them one day in the darkroom, making work prints. Like the surrealists before me, chance occurrences have value and magic, really, for me. In fact, I do relish them. Anyway, that day in the darkroom, working on those Cuba negatives, was one of those days that chance intervened. Thinking I had mistakenly exposed the wrong side a photographic paper. I slipped it into the developer only for a couple of seconds, then threw it down the end of the darkroom sink to be discarded when I cleaned up for the day. That print lay in the bottom of the sink all day. Light going off, going in and out of my studio. And as I was cleaning up, I turned it over, and the image I made that fateful day was beautiful in its own way. It actually intrigued me, and I quickly decided to embark on a long, and let me emphasize, a long experimental adventure using darkroom solutions in innovative and unique ways. I completely upended the traditional way of working in the darkroom. Pretty basic: developer, stop bath, and fixer. That's the traditional way. Instead, I sprayed, I dripped, I even painted photographic solutions onto the exposed paper. So it was really a dance. Process printing involves a collaborative dance between the print in process and me. This process happens slowly over several hours. As I'm working, I go back and forth in the darkroom when inspiration allows me to do that. And I look at the print in process, and I spray more solution, I drip, I do whatever really comes to mind. And it's definitely creating in the moment. I have to be completely present with the print in process. These Cuban negatives with the plants laying against a wall became my sight unseen portfolio. During that 4-year period of working on this series, I honed the process printing technique. And I want to show you one of my prints that I made from that series. This is a process print made in my darkroom and then digitized and printed quite big. I printed it very large for an exhibition, and they're quite beautiful, printed large. I hand it over to you, my dear.
Right. You know, the way you work, which seems to be so intuitive and even coming from your subconscious, is really interesting. And I know that you talk often about the practice of present moment awareness. And I know that you use this in your photographic practice. So can you talk a little bit about present moment awareness and how it affects and influences the way you make the art that you do?
Thank you for that question. Yoga and meditation have been my practice for 40 years. My morning ritual grounds me. It sets the stage for my art practice. And as I walk to my studio, I set intentions every day. It's almost like a mantra. It's the same intentions. May I stay in the present moment today, and may I work from my deepest place. Present moment awareness is extremely important to how I work in my studio. When I'm present in my entire body, I more easily access intuition, inspiration, and know when I receive a visceral reaction to an image, no matter how subtle. Over the years, I have learned to trust those reactions and certainly to act on them. They're very, very important to me in my artistic process. My process printing technique that I use for the prints in my NUMU show benefit greatly from my ability to stay in the present moment while completely trusting the cues I receive as I'm spraying, dripping, or painting solutions onto exposed photographic paper. You could even say that present moment awareness is the bedrock of my artistic practice.
Yeah, it's very special. It's powerful. So now let's talk for a minute about what I think is the central motivation of your wonderfully titled series, Intimate Conversation, which really indicates a relationship with trees. Can you talk a little bit about your history with trees and your connection with trees and why you wanted to make this series?
Oh, yes. I love trees. I love trees. I love them since I was a very young child. The forest, since I was a very young child, was my refuge, really. Until age 3, I lived in a small house in the middle of a forest of beautiful Douglas fir trees. My sister and I experienced a tumultuous, really unsafe household in those early years, and the forest was our daily escape. And we spent happy, carefree days among the trees. We felt safe and nurtured while playing under those magnificent trees. I'm going to pose a question to you. Have you heard of forest bathing? I believe that is what my sister and I were doing while playing in the forest. There's a stream of scientific studies supporting the benefits of forest bathing, of being in the forest and allowing the aerosols to imbue your body. We're told that being in the forest lowers your blood pressure, lowers anxiety, reduces anger, strengthens your immune system, and even helps lift depression. I often think of those beautiful Douglas fir trees as my first friends. I have that kind of emotional connection with trees.
So to continue further on the subject, recent discoveries about trees made by the wonderful Dr. Suzanne Simard, Peter Wollenben, and others have had a big impact on you. And I think you've learned a lot of new information about trees. And can you talk about how that new information has impacted you and how, if it has changed your view of trees and the importance of trees to you?
Well, number one, it's validated my view of trees. And yes, the recent science is just fantastic. Before I answer that, I'm just going to go through my images.
Yes.
This is Sanctuary of Silence. And I absolutely love this image. It's on the cover of my brochure. And
it won a prize too, didn't it?
And it won Best of Show for the International Photo Awards. And it was the most difficult image to make. It was just
Sure.
very it didn't want to reveal itself to me. And I worked on it. And finally I said, you know what? I have to set this aside because it's not working. So I set it aside for several weeks, but was just pulled back to it. And finally, I made the image that you saw. And I got that visceral feeling about it. Oh, it has revealed something to me. I love that image.
Yeah.
This image is Dance of the Forest Spirits. And remember, they're all pigment prints, but made from unique darkroom prints. Intimate Conversation 30, Aurora Luna. I was gifted that title by a friend of mine. He came to my studio and I was showing him my most recent work. And he said, oh my God, this is Aurora Luna. And I said, thank you. I was having difficulty with that title and it just fits it so perfectly for me. And then we have Intimate Conversation 31, No Secrets Here. I was walking with my son in a beautiful forest. And again, the trees speak to me. I walked by this and was pulled back and he was going up ahead of me. And I had to make this photograph. And I'm really happy I did because I love this photograph. And it was a little difficult to allow it to reveal itself to me as well, but it did. Okay, here we are. So the new scientific studies have prompted us to reevaluate how we think about trees. It is extremely exciting. My references are the research conducted by Dr. Suzanne Simard and her book, The Mother Tree. Dr. Simard found through her research that trees, listen to this, communicate with one another through underground fungal filament, miles of filament connecting the trees of the entire forest. And so here we have the filament, and then through that fungal filament or network, the mother tree, typically the oldest tree in that particular forest, transports messages and nutrients to other trees. So here we have the little transporter. We have a letter for this one, and we have a little nutrients for that one, and we have a good cheer for another one. Oh, there's a pest coming. You better put out some hormones that are going to get rid of that pest. So I love this little diagram because it gives you the idea of really, this is what's happening under the ground, and it has just thrilled me. So mother trees know that all species within a forest, even if there are different species, have to be thriving for the entire forest to thrive. And something else that's very exciting to me is that the research is ongoing and certainly in its infancy. Very shortly, we may experience a paradigm shift about how we think and care about trees. I personally believe trees are sentient beings and that we need to treat them as such.
Thank you. I think this is so fantastic, and it broadens our horizons just about how we feel about the natural world and how much more alive it is than we ever guessed.
And how much more thinking it is.
Consciousness,
Yes, because Dr. Simard makes the analogy between this very huge, massive fungal network to the way our brains work.
Yes, right. They're
So contemplate that.
yes. They
When you see a
travel
tree.
through the fungal networks the way our neurons travel across the synapses in our brain.
Absolutely.
Same
Absolutely.
process. It's fascinating. It's fantastic. Hey, to change direction a little bit here, I have always known, I think since I first known you, that you feel very strongly about women in the arts. And with 6 friends of yours who are photographers, you have formed a group called Salon Jane, in which you meet regularly and you support each other and discuss each other's work. You've also exhibited together. So in the larger sense, what do you see for the future of women in the arts, and what do you hope for the future of women in the arts, and particularly when it comes to museum collections where women are so terribly underrepresented?
Well, I would say right up front, if we were really serious about access to women in museums collections, but also exhibiting, we would make a concerted effort to bring more women into each gallery, each museum in this country. In this, I read this a number of years ago, but it really stood out for me. In Sweden, they decided that all the museums were going to only purchase and show women's work until women were in parity with the male artists.
Wow.
And there's several museums, one of which is the Baltimore Museum of Art, that has set that as their goal. They have gotten pushback. And so I don't know what the status is right now, but they've gotten plenty of pushback with that. And so, and of course, women are not in galleries as much as men artists. It's about 1/3 to 2/3.
Right.
And so collectors aren't collecting women's art, and the collections aren't migrating to museums. So it's a very complex problem. And I think there's a little more awareness and talking about it now. And I have great hope for the young women that are coming along.
Yes.
They're just very spirited, and they know what they want, and they push until they get it. And I'm really happy about that. So, and in our own way, the salon, the 6 artists that are in my salon, we're trying to do that. We're trying to get our work out there as much as we can, and to show it. And when we do show it, we always get lots of accolades. Oh, your work is so great. Well, okay, show us more. and so it's distressing in many ways, because it's a constant push. It's a constant thing. But we have to realize that we live in a patriarch. There have been certain males that have been on top of the pyramid, and of course they don't want their power undermined. So there's going to be pushback, and we just have to keep persistent and move forward. And that's certainly what we're trying to do with Salon Jane. So does that answer the entire question? I don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that Salon Jane is part of the direction that we need to move in to make that parity happen. And it's that I did not know about the Swedish museums. That's a great piece of
I just celebrated that. I'm Swedish, by the way.
Yay. And to wind up here, I think we're coming to towards the end of our program. I wanted to ask you, what artistic plans do you have, if any? And do you have any specific ideas for projects you'd like to work on in the future, or any specific ideas of things you'd like to try that you haven't yet tried?
Well, very frankly, I have been just chomping at the bit to get back to my creative work. I haven't done any creative work because of the exhibition since October. And that's a long time for me.
Yeah.
Because I work 3 times a week, and during the Omicron, well, COVID, it's a lot more. In fact, I migrate to my studio probably every day and do something. And so I really want to get back to work, and it always takes me a while to get back into the artistic groove.
Right.
But what I'm thinking at this moment is that I have more images to make for the tree series, and it doesn't feel quite complete as yet. And I love trees so much. Maybe it's going to go on for a while. I don't know for sure. But there are other projects, probably this one that I'm going to state next, that are more like fun projects. I've always wanted to make a book. And so I thought, oh, I love cyanotype. I'll just try to make some sort of little book. Well, it's going to be a bigger book. It's going to be probably 10 by 10, or anyway, it's not going to be little. And on trees, and use that as an element of play, because that's when the next project comes to me, when I'm playing with something. The interludes between projects, I always go into cyanotype or something that I play with. And I've also wanted to do a little paint on my prints, see what happens.
Wow.
So there's lots for me to do, and then I'll migrate into another body of work. I don't know what that will be at the moment. And I used to be so terrified. Oh my God, this is the last one I'll do. But I just have to be patient, because they always come to me.
Yeah.
I start working on them, and I get excited, and away I go.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Helaine.
All
And
right.
thank you all for being here.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. We have a few minutes for some audience questions.
Oh, great.
And there's a question about your meditation process and practice, and if that existed before your artistic process, or how it's developed alongside your artistic process over time.
Well, I was a yogini when my husband told me, don't tell anybody. It was so off the charts to do yoga. I said, don't tell any of our friends. So I said, well, okay. But I continued, of course, and I fell in love with yoga. Yoga really brought me into my body, and it brought me serenity, and it brought me a way of grounding myself when I was running after kids and doing my thing. So it was almost like a lifeline for me. And that's why I have been practicing yoga for over 40 years, every day. I do some postures every day because it grounds me.
Wow.
And as far as my artistic practice is concerned, it's invaluable for my artistic practice, because I'm always searching my subconscious. I'm always searching my inspiration, my intuition for a little guidance. And I love the fact that surrealists just worship chance, but they also wanted to really delve into the subconscious and see what that has to bring. And I'm that kind of artist. I'm really interested in that. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. We have another question. Do you vary your tree roaming a lot, or do you return to the same places? Any plans for doing some interesting human portraits?
Well, I have been photographing trees because I love them since I started photographing. And wherever I go, if I see a tree that I love, I'll photograph it. But when I tried to make prints of them, they didn't seem to be revealing themselves in the prints. So I stopped making prints, actually. And in addition to that, there are a lot of just amazing photographers that work in nature and work with trees. And so I subliminally knew that I didn't want to compete with them. I wanted to do something unique. So I had a storage of tree photographs that I accessed. And then as far as wanting to photograph new trees for my portfolio, I love redwoods. And I wanted to photograph redwoods. And they're very difficult for me to photograph and get the image that I want. We go a little farther, we can show. Show the, here we are. More of the exhibition photographs. And so anyway, I went to seek out redwoods. I have a beautiful oak grove that I love to go to. So, and it inspires me and it nurtures me and it just calls me and I go to it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and yeah. Go ahead, Helaine.
I was just going to say, she mentioned the questioner mentioned something about portraits of people.
Oh, I just wanted to say a minute about this. When you go to the exhibition, you'll see this vitrine and it has work prints in it, prints that didn't quite make the cut. So you can kind of imagine my process. As I'm making these prints, there's a lot of work prints, believe me.
For each one, that's for each final print, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And here is Winged Mystery, this beautiful oak tree. Actually, it was close to my oak grove that I love. And this is printed very large. And there's my redwoods. I love redwoods. And I just could not capture what I wanted to capture. I worked and worked on another image that I have of redwoods. And I just never could make it work. I never felt like it revealed itself to me. And so I worked on this image for quite a while and nothing really happened. I wasn't really satisfied. So I thought, oh, I want to make something. I want to make redwoods. I want to make an image of these beautiful, beautiful historic trees. And so I laid all the images that I had already made of this particular film. Sorry, and negative, and I laid them all out on my work table, and I looked at them and looked at them and looked at them and studied them, and I picked this one up, and I said, "There's something there that really intrigues me," and it was way too dark, so I brought it to my dark room and simply bleached it. And got the image that I wanted. And I got the inspiration to do that. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to do it and see what happens. I was a little nervous because I really liked the image. And I thought, what's going to happen when I bleach it? So I had to really be present and watch as it was bleaching, and then wash it and fix it. And here it is.
It's beautiful. Well, I think since we're actually going to finish this program with a special poem shared by Jane, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen quickly to let you all know. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So NUMU is open on Thursdays from 3 to 8 p.m. and Fridays to Sundays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you can visit our website for all of that information. And Jane's show, as a reminder, runs until June 5th. So please come and see it. It would be so lovely to have you visit NUMU. And I want to tell you all about our upcoming workshop with Patrice Vecchioni, who is an artist herself and a poet. And this is a collage made by Patrice. It's very beautiful. And these workshops are for children and youth. So if you have family members who might be interested or friends with youth and children, please let them know and you can register on our website. And so to finish up, we have a poem. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for attending today, and we hope to see you at our future programs.
Oh, I have a poem that I love that I want to close with. And if you feel inspired, close your eyes and think about yourself in the forest. The title of the poem is Sleeping in the Forest by Mary Oliver. I thought the earth remembered me. She took me back so tenderly, arranging her dark skirts, her pockets full of lichen and seeds. I slept as never before. Nothing between me and the white fire of the stars but my thoughts. And they floated, light as moths, among the branches of the perfect trees. All night I heard the small kingdoms breathing around me, the insects, the birds who do their work in the darkness. All night I rose and fell as if in water, grappling with a luminous doom. By morning, I had vanished at least a dozen times into something better. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Michelle and NUMU. And Jane. Bye, Jane.
Bye, you guys. Bye, everybody.
Bye.